against the wall.
Yeah, I know it kind of sounds like some people who may be listening, it may sound like we're un-American, like we're commies or something, but that's not true. Our government are commies. They're Bolsheviks. And you don't need to look any further than the Communist Manifesto. You don't need to look any further than the policies implemented the last 10 years, or the last 30 years, the last 100 years. And as I said, if it looks like a Zionist and it smells like a Zionist, it is a central banker. And central banks have caused every boom, every bust. They fund both sides of every war. And so we're not un-American. And I say God bless Americans. Oh, man. I say God bless Americans. Welcome to Against the Wall. I'm your host, JJink. This is UCY.TV. We are the media outlet for the future. All right. I think I need to change my intro, but because I'm just getting tired of hearing that. But that is me. That's a speech I gave a few years ago at an excerpt from a speech I gave a few years ago at Freedom Palooza. So tonight is the end of July. Next week will be the beginning of August, the hot time here where I live. I had the pleasure of meeting some new people this year at Freedom Palooza. Last week or the week before, I brought Janice Barcelo on, and you guys loved her. Another a wonderful person that I met was Angela Jackson, and she gave a presentation on the Bay of Pigs, Cold War, psyops in the early 60s, and it was fascinating. And so I asked her if she'd come on the show, and Angela's agreed, and I have Angela on the show tonight. Angela Jackson, welcome to Against the Wall.
Thank you very much, James.
Angela, so I gave away the where I met you, and you. The reason that she was there was, actually there were probably a variety of reasons, but we had her give her presentation, which wasn't very long. Now, I have had a chance to watch your documentary, and it's fascinating. You can tell there's a lot of work put in it. The final analysis, that whole Bay of Pig thing. So why don't I'd like you to introduce yourself. I wish I had done a better bio. I'm not the greatest at conducting interviews, but we'll talk a little bit about your documentary. It's a great documentary. I'd like other people to watch it, about JFK, about the Cold War, covert ops.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a copyleft film, so that means that we can't charge any money for it because of the copyright violations that we've committed in order to make the film.
Right.
So, I'm from Toronto, actually, and I made this film, Toronto, Canada, and I made this film with my former partner, James O'Shaughnessy, and we wanted to get it out for the 50th, and we realized that because of the bias amongst the media and amongst people who hold a lot of this footage, we would never be able to get funding for the kind of film that we wanted to make. So we had to just go ahead and put it together using the fair use clause in the copyright in the copyright law.
Right.
Which is been challenged quite a bit because of freedom of the internet. Is going against a lot of that law, and we consider this documentary to be a triumph in the face of that kind of control. For instance, the motorcade sequence that we show about an hour into the film is the longest compendium of motorcade footage that you will see anywhere.
Yeah, and I have seen some of the footage, and it is actually pretty long. So I'm reminded of Aaron Schwartz, one of my personal heroes. Information and the truth should be free. I mean, I don't mind when people try to make money from their work, but the information should be free, and I encourage people to get this DVD. Where can they find the DVD, or have you not put it up on YouTube yet?
Well, we were up on YouTube, and once we reached about 2,000 views, they took us down. but we're on Vimeo because Vimeo is primarily used by artists, and
Right.
artists are much more adept at manipulating the copyright laws. So.
Right. So that's where we'll go. We'll get it. You can get it at Vimeo, which is a pretty good site. I can imagine you get taken down from YouTube all the time. It's almost not worth putting it up. Just have to keep putting it up. Change your account, put it up again. Change your account, put it up again.
And we lose all the links to the video.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So all these people would post it in forums, and then, it becomes a blank link. So.
Then it says error. Okay, so Vimeo. All right, well, let's go into some of the content then. This is obviously years of endeavor. How long did it take you to put together the information?
It took us 3 or 4 years. We primarily feature interviews with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty,
right.
who was featured as most of the content that was Mr. X in the JFK film. And so we had to check into everything that he was saying and verify it, and then we edited some of those interviews down. The big challenge was getting all the footage because this film is made almost entirely out of historical footage because we wanted to remain as historically accurate as possible.
Right. I guess actual footage is as accurate as you can get, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, there's lots out there if you can get at it.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What are people going to find? We'll move on to like some more modern topics, but I'm fascinated by because this is where, the sort of intrigue. I mean, at the end of World War I, the end of World War II, these really rich elite families began what we now know as the intelligence services around the world, which were really just protection. They were used to protect their family interests around the globe. But really, it was the 50s and the 60s where it started to look like what we see currently as far as what intelligence is and what's going on around the globe, where they control their business interests and
yeah.
So the main push, in my opinion, what happened at the end of the 50s and the 60s when they assassinated JFK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You see with the rise of the Cold War is the rise of covert power and covert operations because the balance of power between the United States and the USSR meant that overt war, because of nuclear weapons, had been virtually made obsolete because once the United States or Russia attacked each other overtly, openly, they would get themselves into, nuclear war. They would get themselves into a stalemate. And so the Cold War was particularly defined by its use of covert operations and proxy wars. And the problem with that is, in terms of the military chain of command, is that you have no direction and you have no accountability. Right? You've got a secret group of guys who have the power and the capability to cover up their tracks and and acquire military hardware from the United States government and commit operations often in the guise of the United States government, when in fact they were never authorized through the military chain of command. And that means, and they managed to sidestep the president even, but we'll go into that later.
Okay, so these black ops, all right, from the way I understand it, did I just say that? The way I understood it was that JFK wanted to actually take these special ops, the command or the leadership from the CIA and give it to the Department of Defense. Or am I wrong about that?
That is correct. The reason
that it wasn't private. So they wanted the plausible deniability, but he didn't want private entities running around the world committing atrocities, right? Or to that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he wanted to reinstitute the military chain of command over covert operations and use the JCS as his primary, what is the word they use? As his primary advisor.
Right, and he was well on his way to doing this.
Yes.
And so what would you say?
Well, The document that we use to prove this is NSAM, which is National Security Action Memorandum number 55.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a few minutes. Explain that, please.
Okay, so this was released in June 28th of 1961. And I'm just reading from the document here. It says, I wish to inform the Joint Chiefs of Staff as follows with regard to my views of their relations to me in Cold War operations. And he regards the JCF as his principal military advisor, responsible both for initiating advice to me and responding to requests for advice. I expect their advice to come to me direct and unfiltered. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have a responsibility for the defense of the nation in the Cold War, similar to that which they have in conventional hostilities. Note the distinction that is made there between the Cold War and conventional hostilities. They should know the military and paramilitary forces and resources available to the Department of Defense, verify their readiness, report on their accuracy, and make appropriate recommendations for their expansion and improvement. And he goes on to say, I regard them to be more than military men and expect their help in fitting military requirements into the overall context of any situation, recognizing that the most difficult problem in government is to combine all assets in a unified, effective pattern. Because, you know, you had the State Department basically running through the embassies, running covert operations, and that's what you saw in the Vietnam War, right? So NSAM 55 came out as a result of the Bay of Pigs operation, because everybody says that, and that's why this movie is called The Bay of Pigs, that whole Bay of Pigs thing, because we tie together the beginning of Kennedy's presidency and him having a rude awakening with this plan to invade Cuba, which was actually an Eisenhower program that had carried over. And few people know that the CIA actually helped get Kennedy elected because they thought that he'd be more amenable to the covert operations agenda than Nixon, because Nixon had been vice president under Eisenhower, and he'd been on the National Security Council, and so he understood more about what was going on and probably would not have allowed them to invade Cuba. Whereas Kennedy was like, okay, yes, the Cubans helped me get elected. The Cubans in Florida were a major force for him to get elected. Not that he was legally elected anyway, but...
Right.
Yeah.
The kosher mafia really wanted Cuba. Maybe that's a different subject.
Yeah, so what happened is the Bay of Pigs operation, went ahead, and the thing is, though, that the Cubans, as I said, it had to be a covert operation. The United States wasn't able to overtly support the Cubans, otherwise they would get embroiled. They would reveal their hands. You see what I mean?
Right.
And an interesting note is that Cuba was not actually communist at this time. Cuba declared that they were communists after the Bay of Pigs as a result of the Bay of Pigs.
Really?
Yes.
See, we're not taught that.
No.
In school.
But there were issues because Cuba was taking oil from Russia, and they wanted it to be refined in Cuba. And then American companies said that they would not refine that oil. And so Castro decided to nationalize the oil companies, which bothered a lot of people.
Especially, the oil companies here in America.
Oh, yeah. So what happened is Castro had these fighter planes, right? And they were capable of destroying the entire Bay of Pigs invasion because they would bomb all of the supply ships. And this is in the movie, and we have footage.
Right. Yeah, I watched it through that. I watched that up to about the end of that in the first sitting. It's kind of a long movie, so you may need to watch it a few times to get the whole thing, but it's fascinating. So, anyways, continue. Yeah, it was the reason that the Bay of Pigs failed was a break in the chain of command, right? Well, actually, it wasn't. It wasn't actually a break, but it was the fact that they didn't destroy those planes.
Exactly.
So it's basically a betrayal of the people when you make a deal with the devil, I guess this is what you get. So the people on the ground there had made the deal, and it looks like they were double-crossed, essentially.
Well, I mean, Alan Dulles wasn't even in the country. He decided to go down to the tip of South America for some very important conference,
Okay, so all right, then what was the Bay of Pigs, Angela? Let's explain what the Bay of Pigs was.
So the Bay of Pigs was an attempt for the anti-Castro Cubans to take back their homeland of Cuba with help by the United States government.
Okay.
from the United States government.
Right, right.
So it was an invasion plan that was equipped through the CIA.
And then why do you think that there was a double cross?
Well, see, we don't even know exactly. We think it was McGeorge Bundy, but like looking into the documents and the records, all of his testimony was redacted, and we don't know why he did that. McGeorge Bundy is obviously, throughout all the other documents, he reveals his hand as being part of the, the corporate shills, right?
Right.
The military-industrial corporate shills.
Exactly. An enemy in Cuba is way more profitable to Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin than a friend in Cuba, right? Is that the gist of it?
Perhaps. I mean, I like to stick to the history and everything, and I'm not,
I threw out names, but I just meant the industrial, the military, the people that make the bombs and that profit from intrigue, and we're still a step below the central banks that profit on both sides of all these wars.
Yeah, and you know what? You're absolutely correct, because, Cuba was definitely a flashpoint for hostilities between the U.S. and the USSR, Yeah. I mean, Cuba was like holding a gun to the head of the United States, and it made all the hawks in the U.S. government extremely uncomfortable and extreme. Like, if you listen, one movie that I recommend people listen to or watch is 13 Days. 13 Days is actually based on the exact transcripts from the White House during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened in 1962 and all but guaranteed Kennedy's re-election because of his actions there, was actually another direct result of the Bay of Pigs, which was just a seminal event for U.S. Cold War relations with Russia and Cuba, and you know what I mean? So 13 Days goes on to show how all of the generals were just trying to drag the United States into this nuclear war. And I recommend people listen to it because it's accurate to the T. It's a historical document in and of itself. And it really reveals the kind of pressure that people were under because it's like the insanity of these nuclear weapons.
So how does Operation Northwood fit in here? Or haven't you pieced that one in yet?
Operation Northwood is, it's de rigueur. I mean, once you look into the CIA, I mean, it's
just a letter?
Sorry?
Is it just a letter or a memo, or was it an actual bona fide plan that just never was implemented?
I believe Operation Northwoods is entirely, of course it's a plan. There's no question about that. They're willing to do anything. They're willing to get away with anything. I mean, like, the true agenda is still somewhat hidden, I mean, we can see the effects. It's just like in the Bible where they talk about the spirit. The spirit is the wind. You see the wind floating in the trees, or it's floating through the trees, right? But you don't see the wind itself. And that's a bit like what this is, this covert off stuff. Right.
I just lost my train of thought. So now we haven't even gotten to actually Kennedy. So who? All right, Alan Dulles had a brother, right? So the two Dulles brothers were deeply embroiled in this whole. Now there was like a sort of an inner battle going on inside the the establishment of the government, right? So the CIA and the CIA's the handlers, the people that control the CIA, I believe that at the end, after Kennedy was assassinated, it's sort of the leadership of the United States was sort of co-opted by the intelligence community.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, when you look at the difference in the United States government, and I mean, I've never idolized Kennedy. I have no illusions. He's part of the Illuminati bloodline.
Yeah.
He wasn't the best for the country in some ways, but he did do many amazing things. And I mean, he was a man who had experienced near death half a dozen times through back surgery and
canal. He was my hero. When I was a little boy, JFK was my hero. I read Profiles in Courage, and the story of PT 109 and how he swam, and rescued his shipmates.
Well, he's a very inspiring president. And yes, I do, I respect him a great deal. And the end of the film, if I could just jump away from the big for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Features a speech that JFK made, the last large speech he made before he died. And I believe that, that speech really sums up why he was killed. It's because he was moving beyond the Cold War and into a strategy for peace. Because with nuclear weapons, you may have mutually assured destruction, but that mutually assured destruction is also a path to peace. It's mutually assured peace because you can't go to war. You see what I mean? And so they use this whole threat and fear of nuclear war to spend trillions of dollars.
That's it, right there, Angela.
State, when in fact JFK had unlocked the keys. You have to understand that JFK had lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was at the crux, and he had to excuse himself from the war room, not the war room, sorry, but he had to excuse himself from the presence of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the White House and go into the Oval Office with just his brother and Kevin Donnelly, and they made the decision because the pressure that the
Okay, sorry about that. We're experiencing some technical difficulties. All right, we've got Angela back. We're back on Angela. I apologize. My finger hovers around the little mute button on Skype, and for some reason, the red button was it said, it's like when you walk by. I'm 47 years old, and I still can't walk by a cherry red electric stove burner without licking my finger and going. And I don't know. I just I ended the call accidentally. So here we are back. All right. Now, JFK was under tremendous. He had a lot of enemies right in the White House, didn't he? And he was under a tremendous pressure.
Yes. And the red phone is something that was put in during JFK's presidency because him and Khrushchev had, in order to avoid a war in the Cuban Missile Crisis, they had to communicate using back channels because they were virtually facing mutinies, not mutinies. Oh, what's the term?
Coups, basically.
Coups, yes, thank you.
So basically, global politics is really all about business interests because since Kennedy, there has been no honest politician in the White House or really in Congress. And people think, well, Russia and the United States were friends during because there's no because competition is a sin. Yes, the industrialists and the bankers loved the Cold War. Kennedy and Khrushchev wanted to prevent an all-out conflict, and I don't know if they even really understood what the 30-year, how long was the Cold War? 30 years, trillions of frickin' dollars. Neither one of them, I don't know if they foresaw that. Did they, you think? I mean, they were trying to avert a global conflict that was being caused or instigated by private interest within both of their own governments, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Buckminster Fuller likes to refer to the CIA as the corporation's invisible army. And if you look at the push through the United States, it was an economic war between capitalism and communism. And a lot of the
Bingo.
documents, sorry?
I said bingo.
Yeah, and so a lot of the documents, like the military assistance program, the CIA had a mandate to support, capitalist interests. And I mean, a company like Pepsi runs a lot more than just the soda bottling, right?
I'm reminded of the fruit company there in South America. What was it? The American Fruit Company. Anyways, same thing. CIA, business interests. CIA went in and.
Yeah, and I mean, Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles had controlling interests in the United Fruit Company.
Yes, that was it. United Fruit Company. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And to this day, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with bananas.
Me too. I love them, but I hate the idea.
Hello?
I'm still here.
Oh, great. Yeah, so when you talk about the Cold War, you're talking about an economic war, and you're talking about the transition from a shooting war into an economic war. And today, that's basically what we've got, is total global economic domination. And, it's interesting because everyone talks about the Vietnam War. Well, what was the Vietnam War? What was the Cold War? These things didn't make any sense, because
Really?
nobody brings up the fact that with nuclear weapons, you make war obsolete between those countries.
Exactly. Well, what you make all-out war, but what you make, I suppose, is what we have now are all these little proxy wars.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is the only way to do it, because we couldn't openly attack anybody with a nuclear weapon any more than they could openly attack us with a nuclear weapon. So really, it's left to the poor people of the world to be slaughtered and to slaughter each other.
Well, the Vietnam War was a great injustice to everybody involved. It was a complete mess. It was run by the CIA through the State Department, and military men were always frustrated with
That's exactly what Kennedy was trying to prevent, right?
Yes. Okay. So to get back to the Bay of Pigs, and it is the Bay of Pigs is like a form for what happened later with Vietnam. So, like, America had been in Vietnam since 1945, and they had been conducting covert operations. And the CIA finally created a brush fire that they could no longer contain with Vietnam, and then troops had to be sent in, right? And they were doing the same thing with the Bay of Pigs, and they've done this. This is a model that the CIA has used, right? And as Colonel Prouty likes to say it, you kick a guy, two people are sitting on either side of a table, and one guy kicks the other guy underneath the table, and then the second guy punches the first guy in the face. And then the first guy says, "Hey, he aggressed against me." You know what I mean?
Yeah, you just did was described Israeli foreign policy and United States foreign policy.
Yes.
Kick them under the table, and then when they jump up and say, "Hey," you throw a bomb on them.
Yes. So the Bay of Pigs, what happened is Castro's fighter planes had to be destroyed at night by the United States. The United States had to bomb those planes, but they had to do them at night so nobody would see that it was the United States helping the Cuban refugees, even though everyone knew the States was helping them, whatever, plausible deniability, right?
Right.
So they get most of the planes on Saturday night, but then the word comes back that 3 of them had been missed, and because they had flown down to Santiago on the other end of Cuba. And so Sunday night, the night before the invasion, Kennedy gave the order through the CIA, through the National Security Council, through this covert chain of command to bomb those planes. And the planes never went to bomb, and they never bombed those planes, right? Like, for some reason, the bomber run was not completed, and we think it was McGeorge Bundy. It got as far as McGeorge Bundy, but once again, everything's been redacted, so we don't know why that happened. And so because those planes were allowed to, because Castro had his fighter jets, he destroyed the whole invasion, and it was a complete failure. And I mean, you go, like, if you really look in, Kennedy sent more fighter planes after that, but he didn't want anyone to know because they got shot down. And if anyone had found out that, like, an American soldier had died or been injured, then they would have wanted to go to war, right?
Right.
And he wasn't prepared to do that. So, and then everyone got mad at him for not helping the Cuban exiles, right? And I mean, Castro declared that Cuba was communist right after that. So, I mean, it was a huge mess, to be honest. But what Kennedy learned is that he had to do an investigation into what happened, because the military chain of command that he's supposed to have as the commander-in-chief during a time of war, not during a time of peace. See, everything gets very muddled with the Cold War.
Right.
Right?
Are we at official war or not?
Yes.
Is he the commander-in-chief? Because he's not. Is he not the commander-in-chief if we're not at war?
Yeah.
And so to refer to him as the commander-in-chief when we're not at war is false.
Well, see, but you were at war, right? But It was, I mean, see, this is one of the reasons that Eisenhower was warning about a standing army, because, like, the vast standing army means you've got all this military capability and
yeah, they don't want to just sit idle.
Yeah. Well, so what happened is he did an investigation, and he discovered what had happened. And as a result of this investigation, he fired Allen Dulles, and he came out with this National Security Action Memorandum number 55, which was a shot across the bow at the CIA. It took many months. So, I mean, the Bay of Pigs invasion was in April or March. I can't remember right now. I made this movie like several years ago.
Right.
And then NSAM 55 came out in June of 1961. So
he made a lot of enemies, right? And the gist of the investigation came out that he definitely had to retrieve his chain of command. He had to relinquish, the State Department from being able to conduct intelligence operations, essentially. How long was it after he was assassinated that LBJ rescinded any of everything that he had done?
Yeah, it was April 16th. Sorry.
Okay.
Because I get, because there are a lot of dates underneath this. They were getting ready in March, but it was April 16th, I thought. So what happened with Vietnam, right? So
yeah,
Vietnam
let's go into it.
Issue. Yeah, as you were getting into. So what we have are National Security Action Memorandums number 263 and 273. So Kennedy released National Security Action Memorandum 263 October 11th, 1963. And he basically pulled 1,000 troops out of Vietnam by 1963. And he referred to a report by McNamara and Taylor, the McNamara-Taylor Trip Report. And he said that a program is to be established to train Vietnamese so that the essential functions now performed by U.S. military personnel can be carried out by Vietnamese by the end of 1965. It should be possible to withdraw the bulk of U.S. personnel by that time. He was pulling out of Vietnam.
Right.
And what you see that's very, very interesting is that November 26th, 1963, National Security Action Memorandum 273 comes out. And I mean, this is 4 days after he died. Right?
Right.
So he died on November 22nd, 1963. And this comes out November 26th, 1963.
Literally, his body's still warm.
Well, and I mean, how long does it take to write one of these things,
Exactly. So they probably had that plan for him, but he refused. So they just wait. Oh, here's LBJ, who's a parasite.
Yeah, and
So
And
now, do you
NSA,
think having LBJ as his VP was a setup from the start, or don't you know about that yet? Because I
well,
don't know. I'm just asking. It seems really suspicious to have this guy as your running mate.
well, LBJ was he was a Dixie Democrat, and so Kennedy needed him to win the South.
Okay.
And they actually offered, see, it's traditional in politics to offer the runner-up the vice presidential position just for the sake of unity within the party, right?
Right.
And see, Robert Kennedy and Johnson, like RFK and Johnson, did not get along. Period. They did not like each other.
Right.
Okay. And it had been heard that LBJ would turn down the vice presidency, right? So that was going around in the circles, and so they felt confident that they could ask him and that he would decline it, and that it would just be a formality. But LBJ accepted. At least this is the surface story. I mean, I don't have any real inside information into this, but the surface story is that he accepted it, and a long, bitter enmity was born within this administration between LBJ and JFK. They never got along. He didn't include LBJ in any of his decision makings. LBJ wanted to have that decision making power. He wanted to be president very badly.
You think then, in your opinion, was he part of the operation against Kennedy, or was it just that he just happened to? Is he an innocent bystander? Probably not. He probably played some role, even if it was after the fact of just taking advantage. But I think he may have held a little more sinister role in it. But I don't know for sure myself.
Yeah. Most politicians are awful people, straight up. It takes, like, Barry Goldwater was a great politician. Him and JFK were actually, like, pretty good friends, and they were looking forward to campaigning together, because they not campaigning together, but you know what I mean, going on the road and doing debates together.
Right.
Because they both had, I mean, JFK, especially after all of his trials and tribulations through the Cold War, he had developed a good body of his own thinking on these subjects, right? And one of the reasons that he was killed is because he had such unanimous support across the entire nation, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was so loved that he really had his own power base. You see what I mean?
So there was no way there would have been. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, somebody like Johnson. I mean, he is your typical spineless politician, right? And they like those kind of people to be in power.
Well, so after Bay of Pigs, it would have been really difficult to control JFK from within by the intelligence, by the CIA, by
because they had burned him politically. Right. They had almost destroyed his entire political career.
And he had gained so much public praise after the Bay of Pigs that there was only really one thing they could do. He probably, in all likelihood, had he not been assassinated, would have been reelected.
Oh, yeah, he was definitely going to be reelected. And RFK actually, remember
was very popular,
running.
Too.
Yeah, when RFK was running, I mean, they had to assassinate him as well because he was just going to come in with a landslide. And Bobby was even more of a fanatic. He was very religious. Like Bobby was a very strong character.
Roman Catholic.
Yeah, he was very Roman Catholic. They say JFK was incredibly unfaithful to Jackie, partially because he had a hormone disorder called Addison's disease. But Bobby was never unfaithful to his wife, and they had like 15 kids.
Right. So what if you could? That basically is why. I mean, in politics, if you can't get a picture of somebody with a little boy, your plane goes down, or you're assassinated in broad daylight. I mean, I know that sounds sick, but if you can't be controlled by skeletons in your closet, then something terrible happens to you.
Well, JFK wasn't beholden to financial interests. I mean, they had plenty of dirt on him, right? But at that time, it was less common for muckraking to be done on the president. Like they sort of had gentlemen's arrangements amongst the press to not sort of reveal a lot of his infidelity. That's why it didn't come out until later.
Right. Well, that wouldn't to me, and I don't know that if it's true, but to me that wouldn't have been enough to alter or to. Somebody wanted to go a full-out war in Vietnam, and Kennedy didn't. And even revealing, his what do you call it? His cheating on his wife or not being as faithful to his wife wouldn't have been enough for the American people to turn their back on John Kennedy and give public support to a full-on war in Vietnam, right? I mean, they just didn't have enough on him. Even if they had brought all that out, in my opinion, he had to be killed so that basically, I'm not going to say the military-industrial complex took over America, but their operatives have controlled our government.
Well, I mean, like, the thing that you see is you get a compartmentalization, because if you want to keep a truly deep conspiracy hidden, you have to keep it hidden within a lot of the acting parties.
Right.
So, like, when you look at the mafia, right? Like the mafia worked both ways. I mean, they helped get Kennedy elected and they helped kill him, right?
Right.
And then you look at the Irish mafia, who were in the back pocket of Joseph Kennedy. Joseph Kennedy had worked in Hollywood for many years, and he knew a lot about public perception management. And he was also, I think, the wealthiest or the second wealthiest individual on paper after the financial crash, because he pulled all of his financial assets out of the market right before the 1929 crash. So the Kennedys were independently very wealthy. I mean, few people know that Jackie spent millions of dollars of Joe's money fixing up the White House, because the White House was in such bad repair. And she did a whole series on it. But I mean, they were so wealthy that they could afford to campaign on mostly their own dollar.
Right.
And they had enough of their own secret, covert allies who were still loyal to them that they could hit back, covertly as well.
Okay, so they killed him, and then LBJ becomes president, and we go into Vietnam. And where does the chain of command go from there?
Well, NSAM 273, which came out on November 26th, says that the number one component of this memorandum is it remains the central object of the United States in South Vietnam to assist the people and government of that country to win their contest against the externally directed and supported communist conspiracy.
And Diem was as corrupt as a politician could be, right?
Diem had been assassinated, actually.
Well, at that point?
Yeah, in October. I think it was October 22nd.
Oh, so he's out of the way.
Just a month before Kennedy. Diem was a puppet of the United States. He was Catholic, and the Catholics were a minority in Vietnam. And that's why you had all those Buddhists protesting, because they had actually been persecuting the Buddhists.
Really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
That's sort of a long story.
Yeah, you don't have to go into that.
Yeah.
We can go into the Cold War a little bit. Because the Cold War, I mean, to me, I've never really got the whole gist of the Cold War. Because as far as communism and Bolshevism, our country is so obviously controlled by Bolsheviks and Marxists that to me, though, I still have a hard time understanding the whole Cold War. The whole Cold War was like this external battle between two forces while they let the other force take over our government from within the whole time, secretly.
Yeah.
What was accomplished? I mean, just basically trillions of dollars on both parts, and and these corporations that became massively wealthy and very, very powerful, and they now control pretty much public or foreign policy here in America.
Well, one thing that I think would really help people to understand what happened is the CIA had a practice called sheep dipping. So sheep dipping is where they would falsify the military records of an operative to make him seem like he was an Air Force pilot or he was a tank operator or something like that. And then, but he would actually be a CIA agent, right?
Right.
And they didn't just do this in the military. They did this throughout the entire United States government because, those communists are everywhere, and they were trying to scare people so much with this communist threat, this external communist threat, because you make the very good point, that it was also an internal communist threat from an international banking cartel, financed by an international banking cartel.
So really, Cold War is just a word.
Yeah.
It really wasn't a war. It was really just international banking cartel that was sucking tax dollars from as many countries as they could. But there really were, Russia and the United States weren't really enemies. Well, maybe some politicians were, but not the elites, not the bankers, and not the industrialists.
No.
It was the same with World War II. The industrialists funded the Bolsheviks. They funded the Nazis or the National Socialists.
Yeah.
And they profit from both. And you move ahead. That's where the intelligence really became legitimate, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So, the ability to have CIA operatives operating undercover within corporations and giving, one of the things that separates the United States from Britain historically is that the British had this problem where the Queen would basically say she would give a royal contracts out to companies so that, if somebody made thimbles, then they would get a royal contract. I can't remember the exact word. And then they would be the only thimble making company for Britain. And the thing that was great about the United States is that there was freedom of enterprise. So everybody who came up with an invention, they were free to then own that invention themselves and come up with build their own company. The Queen didn't come in and say, oh, well, we own that intellectual property and we are now going to charter this enterprise under the Crown mandate. And that's why in Canada you still see Crown corporations, right?
Right.
But and so the thing that the United States managed to do to build this global empire for the corporate run elite, or the corporate armed elite,
right.
was to create a situation where they were basically sole sourcing contracts to company or to within foreign countries. So they would go into Peru, or they would go into countless African nations, and they would say, okay, the United States is giving you aid, and we're giving these companies contracts to do business within your country. You see what I mean? We supplied these companies or your country supplied these companies with the money and the protection, the military protection, especially through the military assistance program, to set up business, and it really gave them a leg up,
The rise of the NGO, right?
I see such corporate dominance in the world today. Sorry?
The rise of the NGO.
Yeah. What I really encourage people, the film is based a lot on what Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty has revealed, okay? And I'm telling you that straight up. Whatever I've been able to corroborate of his information is correct. I haven't found that he's steered me wrong once. And he wrote a book called The Secret Team by Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. It's free online. You just search for it. And there's a companion book called Understanding Special Operations by David Ratcliffe. It's also free online. And they have full copies of the military assistance program and all these other documents that will really help people understand what was going on back then.
Yeah.
Like I really I can't this movie is only really to assist people with understanding the work that Prouty has brought to the fore here.
What also? What would be the final conclusion of Prouty's a body of work, basically?
Well, Prouty wanted to warn the American people of the disastrous rise of misplaced covert power.
Bingo.
Because it's unconstitutional. Having a black budget is totally unconstitutional. The American people are supposed to know where their money is being spent,
and we don't. And to be absolutely sure, black budget money, a lot of it comes from selling dope. A lot of our conflicts, that is part of why we're going into certain places, including Vietnam, including Afghanistan. Maybe not the sole reason, but it's always there because the drugs help to fund these black ops, so that they don't have to ask the people or be accountable to the people. But they don't mind poisoning our children.
Yeah, and I mean, that's partially Vietnam was just another way for them to bring cocaine and opium and to get the poor soldiers who had been drafted into that war hooked on drugs. And it is the most divisive thing, except maybe since the Civil War, to happen to the American people. And it paved the way for the Flower Revolution and all these hippies to come around and say, we oppose war. And then it created these stereotypes of it really ingrained the liberal conservative stereotype in the minds of the American people and created a tremendously destructive rift.
To me, that is the actual, that right there. Now, I'm not saying hippies are bad. I'm just saying that far, far left wing anti-war, I mean, that's sort of the Bolsheviks, the Marxists that control our government now, the political correctness, the cultural Marxism.
Well, I mean, as a Christian, I'm a pacifist,
Me too.
I trust God, right?
I am against war, and I don't believe that any person, there's not a single person on this planet that can say that they follow the words or the teachings of Jesus Christ and support Israel or support war anywhere for any reason.
Yeah.
It's my opinion.
Yeah, there's no faith in that. But, I see where you're going with that, right? This concept of enforced peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's where we're going to get a world government, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where and it's going to be controlled by corporations and, elite CEOs and bankers.
Yeah. So, I mean, divide and conquer is their strategy for us. And the reason that my former partner and I made this film is because we believed very strongly that it was a put-up job, the Cold War, to divide the world, and that with the Kennedy assassination and
Albert Pike
the
wrote
Vietnam
about
War,
it, actually.
Yeah, the Vietnam War was so destructive to the American people, and and I'm very pro-American. I love Americans very much, and it makes me sad to see how maligned they are on the world stage today.
Yeah.
When it's the corporations, it's this hand-in-glove manipulation of the minds and theft of the money and the military weapons of the American people.
Yeah. What's that? What are you working on now, Angela? Anything in particular?
Well, we started an Iraq War movie. We're not 100% sure if we're going to do that. Janice Barcelo has been so incredibly inspiring, and with all this Planned Parenthood stuff coming out, we were thinking of doing one about, for her, one about abortion.
Oh, really? 55 million and counting.
Yeah.
But that's again, it's the same sort. It's the same. The same people running this agenda are also part of this whole. Agenda where a woman isn't actually empowered until she's had an abortion. You're not Angela, I didn't know that if you know this, but a lot of these feminazis claim you're not a real woman if you haven't had an abortion. It's you remember the T-shirts that they used to sell said "I choose me." That's an abort. That's part of the agenda. That's a woman who's saying that I had an abortion because I choose me. Well, I went out and had fun, and I'm going to continue to go out and have fun, and I'm not, so.
Well, it's horrific. I mean, in Canada, they have this thing called partial birth abortions, right? Where they induce the birth of the child, right? And then they decapitate the child while the head is still inside the mother so that they can claim that the child was still a part of the mother when it died. Can you believe that?
Yes. Yeah, sadly, I can.
It's awful. It's awful what they're doing,
It's satanic, man. It's Luciferian. I don't care what anyone says.
Population control is the biggest lie that they've sold us.
Yeah, what do you mean? Oh, that the fact that we're overpopulated, or the fact that we need population control to begin with?
Both, yeah.
Yeah, because actually, industrial it's a myth, and I've covered it many times. The population myth, it is a myth. Humans, all 7 billion of us, only occupy about 7 to 8% of the Earth's actual livable surface. There's enough room. There are enough resources for all of us. There's enough of everything for everyone.
All that's pollution and all these horrible environmental crimes, who's committing them but the same corporations that are controlling our food and most of the labor on this planet? Pretty much, especially with global trade now. All our economies are global. That's not a good thing. That means that doesn't mean that other economies are brought up to our level. That means that we all, like, we go down a few pegs, they may go up a peg, but it equalizes to where we're all a group of poor people, in a world where there's a handful. And when I say handful, there's only a couple of 100,000 people on planet Earth that own more than 75% of the Earth's wealth. 75, a few 100,000. A few 100,000 people own and control billions of people on planet Earth. And they know their day is numbered. That's why they're so vicious. There will be teeth. There will be gnashing of teeth, Angela. Yeah. Thanks, James. No, it's really important for people to realize that we're up against something bigger than, black versus white, women versus men,
Absolutely.
All these petty differences that,
And we see an absence of compassion, absence of true love, an absence of empathy, it being replaced by contempt, by apathy, by shame, and by, aggression. Materialism. Well, predatory capitalism, the whole. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And listen, Angela, I want you to come on again next time. The next time you come on, we'll get together and talk for a little while and put together something a little more cohesive, so that you don't. I left you sort of speechless a couple of times, and I want to avoid that next time. But I really want to thank you for coming on, and I'm very, very grateful that I was able to meet you, and that we're going to be able to cultivate a friendship now.
Thank you very much, James. It's really a great pleasure to have people who are interested and who appreciate this subject matter to listen to watch the movie and to listen to me. I really appreciate that.
Right.
It's been years of just no recognition. It's so hard to get out there when you don't have any money behind you.
Don't I know it? Well, and on top of waking people up, one of the important things is to fellowship. And so there are bright spots in the truth industry. It's not a movement; it's an industry, with the elites at the top. Again, just like any other industry. But there are bright spots, and that is the fact that if you're not in it for the predatory capitalism, there's a lot of beauty and a lot of fellowship with other like-minded individuals. Thank you, Angela Jackson. Take care, guys. Up next is Primer Time, I believe, here at the UCY Media Network.
My leaders were
lawless. All right? Don't let them fool you into thinking you're lawless, that you don't have to care. They can call it whatever they want, but they can't make a thing.
I'd rather die than be a slave to thee. Don't trade me